Lately, I've been feeling overwhelmed. Balancing work with household responsibilities has been a real challenge. I know I haven't been as helpful around the house as I should be, but it's not because I'm shirking my duties. Work has been incredibly demanding these past few months, and it's taken a toll. I understand you're busy too, and I hoped we could share the workload at home more evenly, but when I suggested splitting the chores, it seemed to upset you even more. You questioned how my job could be so demanding, implying I was just avoiding my share of responsibilities. That stung. It hurt even more when you dismissed my efforts altogether, saying I wasn't worth the trouble and suggesting divorce. It felt like you were making a rash decision without trying to see my side or work toward a compromise. Then you accused me of not taking my responsibilities seriously, at work or at home, and even hinted at infidelity. I was shocked. After everything I've been juggling, your lack of faith in me was devastating. When you brought up infidelity, I was too hurt to respond, and agreeing to the divorce seemed like the only way out. What you didn't know was that I had some significant news to share with you, but by then, it felt pointless. I couldn't have anticipated how the choices we made that day would ripple through both our lives. My name is Mary, and I'm 36 years old. I work in the administrative department of a company that specializes in industrial machinery. My career began in sales, but 6 years ago, I transitioned into a role focusing on accounting and legal matters. While I sometimes miss the thrill of sales, this position has allowed me to grow in new ways. I find the work fulfilling. For a long time, my career was my top priority, and my personal life, especially my love life, took a back seat. I hadn't been in a relationship since college, and I'd come to terms with the idea of staying single. That changed 4 years ago when Eric joined the company. Confident, athletic, and youthful despite being slightly younger than me, Eric had an energy that was hard to ignore. At first, my interest in him was strictly professional. I valued competence and efficiency in a colleague, and Eric seemed eager to prove himself. One day, as we moved some supplies, he carried a heavy box to my desk and caught me off guard with a compliment. "Mary, you're not just great at what you do, you're kind and beautiful too. You must be everyone's favorite." His words made me blush. It had been years since anyone had spoken to me like that, and I was momentarily flustered. Eric noticed and teased me lightly about it, making the situation even more embarrassing. I tried to brush it off with a playful scolding, warning him not to get too cheeky just because he was new, but his laughter lingered, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a spark of something I'd nearly forgotten, the thrill of being noticed. As weeks turned into months, our professional rapport turned into friendship. We started grabbing meals after work and spending weekends together. Eventually, our connection grew into something deeper, and 3 years later, we were married. For someone who had almost given up on romance, this was an unexpected but welcome shift in my life. But marriage didn't unfold the way I'd hoped. Though Eric and I worked in separate departments, I still saw his work habits up close, and they frustrated me. "Can you review these client materials for tomorrow?" Eric would say, dumping his unfinished work on my desk without waiting for a response. "This data is full of errors, and the document structure is a mess," I'd point out, exasperated by his carelessness. Despite my protests, Eric consistently relied on me to clean up his mistakes. His documents were riddled with errors, and without my intervention, he'd have missed deadlines and key meetings. At work, he leaned on me far too heavily, assuming I'd always be there to catch his missteps. It wasn't the dynamic I had envisioned, not at work, and certainly not in our marriage. I had hoped that working alongside Eric would offer a different dynamic from our home life, one where responsibilities were more evenly shared. Instead, I found myself burdened on both fronts, managing our shared domestic duties and compensating for Eric's shortcomings at work. This dynamic was far from the partnership I had envisioned. At the office, I wished we could interact strictly as colleagues, but our marriage complicated things. I kept hoping Eric would take his professional responsibilities more seriously. His lapses didn't just reflect poorly on him, they impacted the company and our clients. Time and again, I had to set aside my own work to fix his mistakes, ensuring our shared workplace didn't suffer because of his negligence. One evening, after yet another day of covering for him, Eric left the office early, leaving me to finish his unfinished tasks. His half-hearted apology rang hollow when I came home late to find him waiting for dinner to be served. Despite having hours to contribute at home, he had chosen instead to relax, leaving everything to me. This had become a frustrating routine, a stark reminder of the widening gap between his promises and his actions. I had tried multiple times to address the imbalance in both our work and home lives, but my efforts seemed futile. Eric's apologies were always followed by the same behavior, leaving me exhausted and disillusioned. It had been only 8 months since we got married, yet the reality of our life together felt vastly different from what I had imagined during our courtship. A part of me couldn't help but blame myself for not noticing these tendencies earlier and for enabling his behavior by covering for him both professionally and domestically. determined to make a change. I resolved to stop stepping in for Eric at work. Yet the next day, I found myself falling back into old patterns, helping him as usual. It wasn't a lack of willpower but a tangled web of emotions and the complexities of our relationship that made it so difficult to establish boundaries. Then, unexpectedly, Eric came home with surprising news. He was being transferred to a subsidiary company to strengthen their sales team. His salary would remain unchanged, and the commute was manageable. Despite the added responsibility of revitalizing the subsidiary sales force, Eric appeared unfazed, excited, even. This change was a turning point. Eric would no longer have the luxury of leaning on me at work, and I couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. Perhaps this new environment would force him to take greater ownership of his duties. Or perhaps it was the reset we both needed, a chance to redefine our roles, both at work and at home. I quietly welcomed Eric's transfer to a different location. With the change in his role, the dynamics of our professional relationship were bound to shift, and I no longer had to bear the constant weight of covering for his mistakes. After settling into his new position, Eric began coming home late, fully absorbed in his mission. Though challenging for Eric, this change brought a sense of relief to our relationship. With him focused on his new role and no longer relying on me at work, there was an opportunity for us to reset. I hoped this would lead to a more balanced dynamic between our professional and personal lives. Eric's newfound confidence was palpable. He frequently discussed the decisions he was making at work, critiquing the president's cautious approach to change. "You might not understand the complexities of this," he said one evening, implying that my role wasn't as critical as his. His belief that the company's future depended on bold decisions mirrored the rumors swirling about a leadership change, which seemed to align with his views. Within 2 months, Eric's sense of indispensability had grown. While confidence is usually a positive trait, in his case, it bordered on arrogance. His behavior had shifted from the supportive partner I knew at the parent company to someone who was increasingly self-assured and critical. This shift was most apparent in our daily interactions. One evening, when I mentioned we were out of shampoo, his reaction made it clear how little patience he had for what he perceived as my inefficiency. His words cut deeper when he compared our workloads, implying that my tasks were trivial compared to his important responsibilities. Eric's criticisms also seeped into our home life. He accused me of slacking off, completely unaware of the irony in his words, given how often he neglected his share of household duties. The sharpness of his tone momentarily froze the rhythm of our dinner. I was brimming with responses, ready to point out his own lapses, but I held back, planning to address it at a more opportune moment. As days went by, Eric's inflated sense of self-importance only became more pronounced. He reveled in the complexity of his new role, contrasting it with what he deemed my simple tasks. Despite his condescending attitude, I found a quiet strength in myself. I resolved to wait for the right time to confront his behavior, hoping that with patience, I could help him see the imbalance. His spending habits were also becoming an issue. New watches, designer suits. Eric began placing an emphasis on appearances, convinced they were crucial to his success. When I cautioned him about our finances, his dismissive attitude bordered on recklessness, boasting about his salary and anticipated raises. It became clear that the man I had married was slipping further away, replaced by someone obsessed with status and material gain. While his underestimation of me was frustrating, it also strengthened my resolve. I planned to address these issues, but I wanted to do so thoughtfully, without immediate confrontations. My goal was to find a way to make him understand the importance of mutual respect and appreciation for each other's roles, both at work and at home. Eric's lifestyle, marked by lavish spending and late nights spent out with clients, left me uneasy. He frequently returned home late, claiming that his work obligations necessitated it. While he reassured me that his salary was increasing, I began to worry about the sustainability of his spending habits, especially since I had to manage our household finances with an increasingly limited budget. His absences, which he justified with work commitments, stirred suspicions. I voiced my concerns about the lack of quality time we were spending together, but he dismissed them, claiming his late nights were crucial for the company's image. Our conversations became more strained, with Eric criticizing how I managed both the household and my own job. His words were full of irony, considering how much I had to compensate for his lack of accountability. Eventually, his criticisms grew more personal, questioning the very foundation of our marriage, suggesting that it had been a mistake. Though I acknowledged the strain in our relationship, the suggestion of divorce so early in our marriage felt premature. I proposed that we find a way to compromise, but Eric seemed resolute. He viewed any attempt to share household responsibilities as a sign of my inadequacy. The final blow came when he accused me of infidelity. Stunned and unsure of how to react, I found myself agreeing to the divorce, seeing no other way to address the absurdity of his claim. It was a decision made in the heat of the moment, yet it marked a pivotal turning point in our relationship. I had considered revealing something significant to Eric, but I decided it wasn't worth it. He would eventually find out, but for now, I needed to focus on what came next, an uncertain future now stretching out before me. Looking back, I chose to keep my plans to myself. I didn't realize how impactful this decision would be. After the divorce was finalized, it was surprisingly smooth. Given the brief duration of our marriage, I buried the memories, choosing to move forward as though that chapter never happened. As I turned my attention back to my career, I realized how much more aligned I felt with my true self. But just when I thought I was finally hitting my stride, a call from Eric threw me off course. His frantic voice filled the line, revealing that the police were looking to speak with him, something directly related to my actions, or more precisely, the actions of the company. As Eric stumbled through his questions, trying to understand what was happening, I had my own revelation. In the past month, unbeknownst to him, I had risen to the role of president at the subsidiary where he worked. His disbelief and subsequent insults stung, but I remained composed, calmly outlining my qualifications and the responsibilities I had carried over the years. Eric's confusion stemmed from his lack of awareness about my role at the subsidiary. I explained that my absence there had been deliberate, to observe his behavior without bias and uncover the full extent of his unprofessional conduct. The shock on Eric's face deepened as I revealed the truth behind his transfer to the subsidiary. Far from being a special assignment based on merit, it had been a strategic move to sideline him due to his underperformance and disruptive behavior at the parent company. It wasn't long before the evidence of his embezzlement surfaced, and with it, police involvement. The gravity of his actions must have been overwhelming for him. His voice faltered as I presented the facts, especially when confronted with undeniable proof of his financial misdeeds and his extramarital affair. I have found evidence of your scheme to divert company funds through direct cash transactions with clients, a clear violation of company policy, I stated, and the affair with your younger colleague from accounting has only worsened the situation, implicating her as an accomplice in the fraudulent documents. The sum of his embezzlement, part of which had funded his lavish lifestyle with his mistress, was substantial. His stunned silence spoke volumes. Now, Eric faced not only legal consequences for his actions but also the collapse of his professional reputation. What struck me most, however, was his focus on the embezzlement, as if the affair were a secondary issue. His attempts to cover up his indiscretions, adjusting camera angles to avoid being caught, had failed. The evidence was clear and irrefutable. Despite his belief that he had been cautious, every attempt to hide his actions only made the truth more undeniable. The police inquiry, though initially voluntary, was unavoidable now. Ignoring it would only make matters worse for Eric. Along with the embezzlement charges, there were whispers surrounding his mistress, rumors of her declining health and a potential pregnancy, which added another layer of complexity to the situation. I couldn't help but wonder, was the urgency of our divorce linked to her pregnancy? Eric now found himself facing a cascade of consequences: legal action for embezzling, the fallout from his affair, potential alimony, repercussions at work, and the looming reality of a child on the way. During a tense phone call, his panic was palpable. His words were a jumbled mess of desperation that sent a chill down my spine. "Do you have anything else to say? I need to get back to work," I said, my patience wearing thin. His voice cracked with urgency as he begged me to intervene to avoid arrest. Despite the public setting around him, his plea for help seemed to overshadow any embarrassment he might have felt from the onlookers. His desperation was clear, but the gravity of his actions left no room for sympathy. With a final, steady breath, I ended the call and returned to my tasks, leaving him to face the consequences of his choices. Eric was later convicted of embezzling $300,000, sentenced to 5 years in prison, along with his mistress, who was confirmed to be pregnant. This confirmed my suspicion that the rush to divorce was driven by the news of her pregnancy. Her situation grew even more complicated, as she would give birth in prison, her child likely to be raised by others during her incarceration. The emotional toll of being separated from her newborn and missing those vital first years would undoubtedly be immense. Upon their release, Eric and his mistress would have to confront a harsh new reality: fired from their jobs due to criminal activities. They would face a job market that offers little mercy to those with criminal records. I moved forward with a lawsuit for civil damages amounting to $380,000, the same amount Eric had unjustly demanded from me, intending to add financial injury to their growing list of misfortunes. Their challenges were just beginning. They would need to find employment while burdened with significant debt, alimony payments, and no savings left from their lavish spending sprees. The road ahead would be long, hard, and unforgiving. In the aftermath, I focused on revitalizing the company, clearing away its toxic elements. The office atmosphere improved dramatically, with employees now more engaged, productive, and motivated. My commitment to strengthening the company's performance had never been stronger. As for me, my life, once shackled by Eric's lies and misdeeds, was now on a different path. one of professional dedication, personal satisfaction, and the freedom to move forward, unburdened by the shadows of the past.